In our first class, we looked at something which might be completely new to many of you, prophecy, and its fulfillment physically in the real world. In that class, we looked at some of the outstanding prophecies from the Old Testament. We also had a bird's eye view of the history of Israel to see how prophecy was fulfilled for that nation and people. And I spoke briefly about how there are prophecies in the Bible yet to be fulfilled, some that may yet impact you and me in this world and in our immediate future. In fact, I'll mention again, as I did in the first class, that when Jesus was asked by his disciples about the future of the world, he said, "When you shall see the future events spoken of by Daniel the prophet, whosoever reads, let him understand." Whosoever reads, let him understand. It seems like Jesus is trying to tell us that what Daniel said was and is important. So we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 2, which is considered by scholars of almost all faiths to be the briefest and most concise overall picture of the history and future of the world in the entire Bible. Let's find out who Daniel was, what his life was like, and what this is all about. The date is around 604 BC. Judah was in its last few years and months as an independent nation after close to 800 years of existence. Daniel was probably a young teenager at the time. Those were ominous, unstable, troubling times for a young man to be growing up in. The biggest news in the world at that time was the fall a few years earlier of the former superpower of its day, the kingdom of Assyria, and the emergence of the kingdom of Babylon, which was conquering and subduing all before it. In 604 BC, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, sent a military force against Judah and Jerusalem. It was in this raid against Jerusalem that our young teenage Daniel was carried away as a captive and virtual slave hundreds of miles to the east, to Babylon. After they'd been taken away to Babylon, Daniel and his 3 friends were placed in something like a training school for young men who'd been found to be of royal ancestry within Israel. Immediately, they distinguished themselves there by deciding to stay true to their faith and convictions, while at the same time cooperating with their new rulers. Just to mention it, Babylon in its day was every bit as awe-inspiring as Rome or Athens were in their day, or modern cities are today. The Golden City, intelligent, modernistic, powerful, the center of the world for those times and seemingly invincible. We'll begin our story when Daniel and his friends had already been living in Babylon for 3 years. What we find is that King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and he couldn't remember it. Now, that can happen to anyone, but this was something special. For one, he was virtually the ruler of the world at that time, or at least most of the known civilized world of that day. And second, he was accustomed to having his way immediately. So, he did what any ruler of the world would do. He called his magicians and advisors and all the folks that world rulers have around them. And he said, "I've had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream." It seems like people haven't changed over the last 2,600 years very much, because his advisors said, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation." Nebuchadnezzar saw right through that and said, "The thing is gone from me. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor." The advisors stalled around some more, and the king threatened them again, to which they finally got shook up and real honest and said, "There's not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician or advisor. It's a difficult thing that the king requests, and there's none other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh." That's the truth, isn't it? Nobody can tell you what you dreamed. Well, this was very unsatisfactory for Nebuchadnezzar, and he immediately ordered the beginning of the slaughter of all of his magicians and astrologers and advisors, and this was the type of position that Daniel and his friends were being schooled for. Now, if you've never heard this before, you might be wondering, what's all this ancient history got to do with prophecy in the future? Just hang in there. It's coming. So the next thing you know, one of the king's chief guards was over at Daniel's dormitory, letting him and his friends know that they needed to be prepared to get executed. Daniel asked what was up, and when he heard about the king's dream, asked if he could have time to pray to his God for the dream and the interpretation to be revealed to him. This was granted, and Daniel and his friends got down to some real serious prayer time in order to get hold of God and find out what this was all about. How could he know what the interpretation was when he didn't even know the dream? And here's what it says happened next. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. That means the Lord actually showed Daniel what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was and what it meant. Completely impossible without the supernatural help of God. So Daniel prays a real prayer of thankfulness. Here it is. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are His. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with Him. I thank you and